Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I found a dark web forum about haunted houses. When I posted my address as a joke, someone replied, "I'm already here." Okay, I don't usually do this. I mean, I'm not the type of guy who spills my life story on the internet. But this is too messed up to keep to myself. I need to know if anyone else has experienced something like this, or if it's just me. I'll warn you now, this gets weird. Like goosebumps on your skin, checking over your shoulder weird. You've been warned. So, it all started a few weeks ago. I was on a Discord call with some of my college buddies, and we were talking about urban legends and creepy stuff we'd seen online. You know, normal late-night conversation vibes. One of my friends, Jared, started talking about the deep web. He said he'd stumbled on some wild stuff, like forums where people claimed to share cursed objects or haunted experiences. We laughed it off at first. Jared's kind of a wannabe edgy guy, always talking about spooky things, like he's some kind of expert. But then he said something that got me curious. "There's this one forum," he said, lowering his voice, like we were at some sketchy dive bar instead of in a Discord voice chat. "It's all about haunted houses, like real haunted houses. People share locations, stories, and sometimes even live footage of them exploring the places. It's nuts." At first, I thought he was bluffing, but then he dared me to check it out. And here's the thing, I'm a sucker for dares. Always have been. So, like the idiot I am, I said, "Sure, send me the link." Now, I'm not going to tell you how I got there. That's not important. And honestly, I don't want to encourage anyone to go looking for this stuff. The deep web isn't just creepy, it's dangerous. But I'll admit, I was curious. I wanted to see if it was all just clickbait stories, or if there was actually something to it. The site itself looked old school, like one of those GeoCities pages from the early 2000s. The background was pitch black, with white text and a blood-red header that read, "Welcome to the haunting grounds." There were threads upon threads of people sharing stories about haunted houses they'd visited, or claimed to have visited. Some people posted blurry photos of abandoned buildings, while others shared detailed maps with warnings like, "Do not enter after midnight," or "Something watches from the windows." I was intrigued, but skeptical. It felt like a mix of urban legends and over-the-top ghost hunting fantasies. But then I found a thread titled, "Prove your courage, post your address, and we'll tell you if your house is haunted." Now, I know what you're thinking. Who in their right mind would post their address on a sketchy deep web forum? But here's the thing, I didn't take it seriously. The thread was full of obvious trolls. One guy claimed his house was haunted by Elvis, and another said his fridge kept screaming at him in Latin. It was ridiculous. I figured, why not join in on the fun? So, I typed out my address, just as a joke, and hit post. That's when things got weird. It took less than a minute for someone to reply. The username was Watcher1313. No profile picture, no details about them. Just a single sentence. "I'm already here." At first I laughed. I thought, okay, this guy's just messing with me. I replied with something like, yeah, sure you are. What room am I in then? But instead of answering, he posted a link. A live stream link. My stomach dropped. I don't know why, but something about it felt wrong. I hesitated, hovering my mouse over the link. Jared, who was still on the Discord call, said, "Dude, click it. It's probably just some stupid prank." Against my better judgment, I did. The stream opened to what looked like my front yard. No joke. The video was grainy, like it was being recorded on an old flip phone, but I could clearly see my driveway, my car, and the Halloween decorations I'd set up earlier that week. I felt my chest tighten. "No way," I muttered. Jared heard the panic in my voice. "What? What's wrong?" "Someone's outside my house," I whispered, trying not to sound insane. "They're filming my yard." Jared laughed nervously, probably thinking I was messing with him. But then the camera on the live stream started moving. Slowly, it panned toward my living room window. And that's when I saw it. My silhouette, sitting at my desk, illuminated by the glow of my computer screen. Holy sh! I slammed my laptop shut and bolted to the window, yanking the curtains closed. My heart was pounding like a drum. Was this a prank? Some kind of elaborate joke? I didn't know what to think. I told Jared I'd call him back and ended the Discord call. I spent the next hour pacing around my apartment, checking every window and door. I even went outside with a flashlight, looking for anyone who might be lurking around. But there was no one there. The street was quiet, and my yard was empty. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe someone had found my address online and decided to mess with me. I mean, people do that kind of stuff all the time, right? But here's where it gets worse. When I went back inside, my laptop was open. I know I closed it. I'm 100% sure I did. But now, the screen was on, and there was a new message on the forum. "Nice decorations. The skeleton on the porch is my favorite." My hands were shaking as I read it. They'd been here, right outside my door. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops? Tell them what? That someone on the internet was stalking me. It felt ridiculous. And then I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Right at my front door. I froze. My whole body locked up as those 3 knocks echoed through my tiny apartment. I wasn't imagining it. Someone, something, was outside my door. My first instinct was to run and hide. But that's the thing about fear. It messes with your head. Instead of doing the smart thing, I just stood there, staring at the door like an idiot, waiting for it to happen again. And it did. 3 more knocks, this time louder, more insistent. My brain went into overdrive, scrambling to make sense of what was happening. Was it a prank? Maybe Jared had told someone about the forum, and they were trying to scare me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This wasn't funny. This was personal. Too personal. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a baseball bat I kept by the couch for emergencies, which up until this point meant chasing off raccoons that got into the trash. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep my grip on it. Slowly, I inched towards the peephole. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. When I looked through the peephole, all I saw was darkness. Not like it's nighttime darkness. It was like someone had covered the lens with their hand. Whoever, or whatever, was out there didn't want me to see them. That's when my phone buzzed. The sound was so sudden, I nearly dropped the bat. I backed away from the door, keeping my eyes on it, and fumbled to grab my phone from the coffee table. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Why don't you open the door?" The smiley face made it worse. So much worse. My knees buckled, and I had to sit down before I collapsed. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that message, but eventually, I mustered the courage to type back, "Who is this? What do you want?" The reply came almost instantly. "I told you, I'm already here." I could feel my stomach turn, like I was going to be sick. I stood up, every muscle in my body tense, and made a decision. I wasn't going to play their game. I was going to call the cops. I opened the phone app and dialed 911. My thumb hovered over the call button, but before I could press it, another text came through. "Calling the cops won't help. Check your back door." My blood ran cold. I live in a small apartment, so there's only one way in and out, the front door. But there's a sliding glass door in the back that leads to a tiny patio. I rarely use it. It's usually locked, with a wooden dowel wedged into the track for extra security. But the thought that someone might be out there was enough to make my skin crawl. Still clutching the bat, I crept toward the back door. The blinds were drawn, but I could hear something, scratching, faint but unmistakable, like fingernails scraping against the glass. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that door as possible, but something kept me rooted in place. I reached out with one hand, slowly pulling the blinds aside, just enough to peek through. And that's when I saw him. A man, if you could even call him that, was pressed up against the glass, his face barely an inch away. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes, God, his eyes were too wide, like they'd been pried open and couldn't close. His mouth was twisted into a grin so unnaturally large, it looked like it hurt. He was staring right at me, but that wasn't the worst part. His hand, it was inside the door. Somehow, he'd managed to pry it open just enough to get his fingers through, and he was clawing at the wooden dowel, trying to lift it out of the track. I screamed. I didn't care if it made me sound weak or scared. I was both. I yanked the blinds shut and ran back to the living room, locking myself in the bathroom. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but I managed to send Jared a message on Discord. "Someone's in my house. Call the cops. Now." The response bubble popped up almost immediately. "Dude, what are you talking about?" Before I could reply, I heard it. The sound of glass shattering. The back door. He was inside. For a moment, everything was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring, like your body knows something bad is about to happen. I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, trying to listen. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate. They moved through the apartment, pausing every few seconds, like he was looking for something, or someone. And then, my phone buzzed again. "You can't hide forever." The message was from the same unknown number. I stared at it, my mind racing. How did he know? How was he doing this? Then I realized I'd left my laptop open. My webcam was still on. He could see me. He'd been watching me this whole time. I threw a towel over the webcam, but it was too late. He already knew where I was. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. There was a long pause. I held my breath, gripping the bat so tight my knuckles turned white. Then he spoke. "I like your Halloween decorations," he said. His voice was low, raspy, and too close. "But you forgot the best part." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had been sewn shut. "Don't worry," he continued. "I'll take care of it for you." Then, Just as suddenly as he'd arrived, the footsteps retreated. I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing. I stayed in that bathroom for what felt like hours, too scared to move. Eventually, I mustered the courage to come out. The apartment was empty. The back door was shattered, but there was no sign of him. The only thing he'd left behind was a single message written on my living room wall in what looked like blood. "You're next." I packed a bag and left that night. I didn't care where I went. Anywhere was better than staying there. I thought about going to the cops, but what could I tell them? That some psycho from the deep web broke into my house and left a creepy message. They'd never believe me. But here's the thing. When I got to my car, there was something waiting for me. A small package wrapped in plain brown paper. My name was written on it in that same red ink, or blood. I didn't open it. I threw it into the nearest dumpster and drove as far away as I could. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. But then, 2 days later, I got another text. "Nice motel. Room 203, right? I told you. You can't hide forever." I couldn't breathe when I read the text. My hand started shaking so badly, I dropped my phone onto the cheap motel bedspread. Room 203. My room. He knew. I forced myself to look around the small room, scanning every shadow, every corner, every possible place someone could be hiding. But it was just me. The room was dead silent, except for the faint buzz of the flickering neon sign outside the window. My suitcase was still half unpacked on the bed, my laptop sitting next to it, and my hoodie draped over the chair in the corner. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for the smell. I hadn't noticed it at first, but now it hit me. Metallic, sharp, like pennies left out in the rain. Blood. The smell was faint, but unmistakable. My throat tightened, and I instinctively backed up toward the door. That's when I noticed the bathroom light was on. I hadn't turned it on. The door was cracked open just enough to see the glow spilling into the main room. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Someone was in there. I could feel it, like a sixth sense screaming at me to run. But I didn't run. I couldn't. Something kept me rooted to the spot, like a sick part of me needed to know. I grabbed the only weapon I could find, a cheap motel lamp with a tacky beige shade, and crept toward the bathroom. My bare feet barely made a sound on the thin, stained carpet. With one hand, I pushed the door open all the way. The bathroom was empty. Well, not completely empty. The mirror over the sink had been wiped clean, leaving streaks in the steam that still clung to the glass. And on the mirror, written in what I swear to God looked like blood, were 3 words: "I see you." I stumbled back, dropping the lamp. My foot caught on the edge of the bed, and I fell hard, slamming my elbow against the nightstand. Pain shot through my arm, but I barely noticed it. My brain was too busy screaming at me to get out. Before I could even think about moving, my phone buzzed again. Another text. This one was worse than the last. "Check the closet." My stomach dropped. I hadn't even thought about the closet. It was one of those crappy sliding door ones, the kind you'd find in any budget motel. The doors were slightly ajar, leaving a sliver of darkness visible inside. I wanted to run. Every instinct I had was telling me to grab my keys and drive until I ran out of gas. But something kept me there, frozen in place, staring at that closet. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was stupidity. Or maybe it was the terrifying thought that if I ran, he'd find me anyway. He'd proven that already. Gripping the nightstand for support, I forced myself to stand. My legs felt like jelly, but I somehow managed to take a step forward, then another. The closer I got to the closet, the louder my own breathing sounded. It was shallow, ragged, like I'd just run a marathon. I reached out with one trembling hand and grabbed the edge of the closet door. Slowly, I slid it open. Nothing, just my clothes, hanging on the cheap wire hangers I'd stolen from my old apartment. Relief washed over me, so sudden and overwhelming that I almost laughed. I felt stupid for letting myself get so worked up. It was just a game, I told myself. Some psycho playing with my head. He wasn't here. He couldn't be. That's when I saw it. At the bottom of the closet, tucked in the shadows where the dim light didn't quite reach, was a box. Small, brown, unmarked, just like the one I'd found on my car. My stomach churned as I knelt down and reached for it. My hand hovered over the box, hesitating, as if touching it would make all of this more real. Finally, I ripped the lid off. Inside was a single Polaroid. The picture was grainy, the kind you'd expect from an old camera, but the image was crystal clear. Me, sitting on the motel bed, staring at my phone. The same exact position I'd been in when I got the first text. There was something else in the box, a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it with shaking hands and read the single line written in jagged red letters. Run. I didn't pack. I didn't think. I just grabbed my car keys and bolted. I left everything behind. My suitcase, my laptop, my wallet. None of it mattered. The only thing I cared about was getting as far away from that motel as possible. The parking lot was empty, lit by a single flickering street lamp. My car was parked near the edge of the lot, and as I sprinted toward it, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see him. But there was no one, just the empty windows of the other motel rooms, staring down at me like dead eyes. I jumped into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the long, empty road ahead. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just drove. The wheels screeched as I tore out of the parking lot and onto the highway. For a while, I thought I'd escaped. The road was quiet, the night sky stretching out endlessly above me. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights tailing me, but there was nothing. And then my phone buzzed. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it was him, but I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed the phone from the passenger seat and glanced at the screen. Nice drive. Mind if I join you? My hands tightened on the wheel. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might stop altogether. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and that's when I saw it. A man sitting in the back seat. His face was barely visible in the dim light, but I didn't need to see it to know. It was him. The wide eyes, the twisted grin. He was just sitting there, watching me. I slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a stop, and I whipped around, gripping the seat like it was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. But the back seat was empty. I don't remember much after that. I think I blacked out, or maybe my brain just refused to process what was happening. The next thing I knew, I was parked on the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. When I finally calmed down enough to look at my phone again, there was one final text waiting for me. You can't run forever. It's been 3 days since that night. I've been driving nonstop, hopping from one motel to the next, never staying in the same place for more than a few hours. I haven't slept. I haven't eaten. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. Every time I stop, I feel like someone's watching me. I don't know who he is or why he's doing this, I don't even know if he's human. All I know is that no matter where I go, he'll find me. He always does. And I don't think I'll survive the next time he does. I don't remember how I ended up in the parking lot of that 24-hour diner. Maybe my body just gave up. Maybe it was instinct, some desperate subconscious attempt to find light, noise, people. But when I looked up from the steering wheel, gripping it like a lifeline, there it was. The neon sign buzzed in the dark. Half the letters burned out, so it just read, Dyer. Inside, I could see a waitress wiping down the counter and an old man hunched over a cup of coffee. Normal. Safe. But nothing feels safe anymore. I didn't want to stop, but my gas tank was nearly empty, and my body was screaming at me to rest. Just for a minute. I told myself I'd grab a coffee, maybe something to eat, then get back on the road. Keep moving. That's the only thing keeping me alive. At least, that's what I'd convinced myself. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and the waitress looked up, giving me a tired smile. "Sit wherever you want, hun," she said, her voice scratchy, like she'd been working the graveyard shift for decades. I chose a booth in the corner, as far from the windows as I could get. The place smelled like burnt toast and stale grease, but it was warm, and the fluorescent lights made the shadows seem less threatening. I ordered a coffee, black, and sat there staring at the table, trying not to fall apart. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept glancing at the other customers, 2 truckers at a table by the door, and the old man at the counter, who hadn't moved since I walked in. They looked normal, like people who didn't have a care in the world. I envied them. The waitress brought my coffee and lingered for a moment, probably noticing how strung out I looked. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice softening. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She gave me another smile, though this one was tinged with pity, and walked back to the counter. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers, and tried to convince myself I wasn't being watched, that I was safe, that he wasn't here. But deep down, I knew better. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that coffee like it held the answers to all my problems. But eventually, the bell above the door jingled again. My heart stopped. I didn't look up right away. I couldn't. Instead, I listened. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The kind of steps someone takes when they want to be noticed. Whoever it was, they walked past the truckers, past the old man, and stopped right in front of my booth. "Mind if I join you?" The voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was an edge to it, something sharp and dangerous, like a knife hidden in plain sight. I forced myself to look up, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't him. Not the man from the live stream, not the man who'd clawed at my back door or sat in my car. But somehow, this was worse. The man standing in front of me looked normal. Too normal. Clean cut, with neatly combed hair and a sharp suit that didn't belong in a place like this. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom, not a sketchy diner in the middle of nowhere. But his eyes. God, his eyes. They were cold, empty, like a doll's eyes, like he'd forgotten how to be human. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had been filled with sand. He didn't wait for an invitation. He slid into the booth across from me, placing his hands flat on the table, and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile that made you want to crawl out of your own skin. "You've been busy," he said, his tone conversational, like we were old friends catching up after years apart. "Driving all night, motel to motel, no real destination. It's almost like you're trying to outrun something, I felt like I was going to throw up. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. His smile widened. "A friend. Someone who's been keeping an eye on you." My stomach churned. "Why?" The man tilted his head, studying me like I was an animal in a cage. "Because you broke the rules." "Rules?" My voice cracked, and I hated how weak I sounded. He leaned forward, his smile fading. "You went looking for something you shouldn't have. And now, it's found you." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "The forum?" I managed. "The haunted house thing?" He nodded, slow and deliberate. "You thought it was a joke, a game, but it's not. It's let's call it a ritual. And you opened the door." "I didn't do anything," I protested, my voice rising. The truckers glanced over, but the man didn't seem to notice or care. "You posted your address," he said, his tone so calm it made my skin crawl. "That's all it takes. An invitation. You invited it in." My mouth went dry. "Invited what?" The man smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll see." Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table toward me, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was savoring every second. "This is for you." I stared at the envelope, my hands refusing to move. "What is it?" "Instructions," he said simply. "If you want to survive." "Survive what?" My voice cracked again, and I hated myself for it. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, smoothing out his suit jacket, and gave me one last smile. "Good luck," he said, before turning and walking out the door. I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest. The truckers and the old man didn't even look up. It was like they hadn't noticed him at all, like he didn't exist. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the envelope. Every instinct I had was telling me to burn it, to throw it away, to pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. My hands moved on their own, reaching out and tearing it open. Inside was a single piece of paper. The handwriting was neat, precise, like it had been written by a machine. It wasn't long, just 3 rules. Keep moving. Never stay in one place for more than 6 hours. Don't let it touch you. If it does, it's over. Don't trust anyone. At the bottom of the page, in bold letters, was one final warning. It will follow you until you finish what you started. I didn't finish my coffee. I didn't even bother paying. I shoved the envelope into my pocket, grabbed my keys, and ran out to my car. The parking lot was empty, the diner glowing like some sick beacon in the darkness. I jumped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something in the distance. A shadow, standing at the edge of the parking lot. It didn't move. It didn't need to. I knew it was watching me. I floored the gas pedal, speeding out onto the highway. The shadow didn't follow, but I knew it didn't need to. It would find me. It always did. I didn't stop driving. I didn't even know where I was going, just that I couldn't stop. The rules burned in my brain like neon signs, repeating over and over. Keep moving. Don't let it touch you. Don't trust anyone. I replayed those words in my head until they felt like the only thing tethering me to reality. But reality didn't feel real anymore. Not after everything that had happened. Not with the dark highway stretching out endlessly in front of me, empty except for my headlights, cutting through the night. Not with the cold weight of the envelope sitting on the passenger seat, like it was mocking me. And then the radio turned on. I nearly swerved off the road. One second it was silent, and the next it was blaring static, so loud it felt like needles stabbing into my ears. I fumbled with the dials, trying to turn it off, but it wouldn't budge. The static shifted, crackling and popping, like it was trying to form words. Then it did. "You can't run." The voice was distorted, warped, like it was underwater, but I recognized it. It was his voice, the man from the diner, calm, cold, and laced with something I couldn't put into words, something that made my stomach churn. "You broke the rules," the voice continued, the static fading in and out. "Now you have to finish the game." "I didn't do anything," I shouted, slamming my fist against the dashboard. "Leave me alone." The voice didn't answer. Instead, the static faded, leaving only silence. The radio clicked off on its own. I was alone again. Or so I thought. About an hour later, I saw the sign. It appeared out of nowhere, glowing faintly in the darkness, like it had been waiting for me. "Dead end. 5 miles." The words sent a chill down my spine. I didn't want to keep driving, but I didn't have a choice. The highway stretched on in a straight line, with no exits, no turns, no escape. The darkness beyond my headlights seemed to press closer, swallowing the world around me. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow, a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I realized it was a figure, standing in the middle of the road. My heart jumped into my throat. It wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. I hit the brakes, the tires screeching as the car came to a stop. The figure didn't move. It was tall, unnaturally so, and its face was wrong, pale and blank, with no eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just a smooth, empty void where a face should have been. But somehow, I could feel it staring at me. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I slammed my foot on the gas, swerving around it, and kept driving. My hands were slick with sweat, gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see it standing there, watching me. But it wasn't there. It was in the back seat. I screamed, jerking the wheel so hard the car skidded off the road and slammed into a ditch. The airbag exploded in my face, knocking the wind out of me. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My head was spinning, and my vision was blurred, but I could feel it. I could feel it. The weight in the back seat. I turned slowly, every muscle in my body screaming at me to stay still, to not look. But I had to. I had to see. The thing was sitting there, its featureless face inches from mine. I could feel its breath, hot and damp, though it didn't have a mouth. Its head tilted to the side, like it was studying me. And then, it reached out. Its hand was long and skeletal, the fingers tipped with jagged black nails. They hovered just above my chest, and I realized, too late, that it wasn't trying to hurt me. It was claiming me. I blacked out. When I came to, I was sitting in the driver's seat, the car parked on the side of the road. The ditch was gone. The crash was gone. The thing was gone. At first, I thought I'd dreamed it, but then I looked down and saw the scratches, deep, jagged marks etched into my chest, forming a symbol I didn't recognize. It burned like fire, the pain so intense I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a new message from the same unknown number. "Time's up." The highway ended in a clearing. There was no dead-end sign, no barricade, just an open space surrounded by thick trees, their branches twisting together like they were trying to block out the sky. In the center of the clearing was a house. Not just any house. My house. The same front porch, The same skeleton decorations I'd put up before all of this started. It was impossible, but there it was, standing in the middle of nowhere, like it had been ripped from my life and dropped here. My hands were trembling as I got out of the car. The air was cold, biting against my skin, but I barely noticed. I didn't want to go inside. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. But the rules said I had to finish what I started, and I knew, deep down, that this was the end. The front door was unlocked. It creaked open on its own, revealing the dark, empty hallway. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. The furniture, the decorations, even the faint smell of coffee from the morning I'd fled. It was like stepping into a nightmare version of my own life. I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The further I went, the more the walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching and twisting like they were alive. And then I heard it, the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, coming from upstairs. My legs felt like lead as I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. The knocking continued, louder and louder, until I reached my bedroom door. I opened it, and there he was, the man from the live stream, the man who'd been in my car, my motel, my life. He was standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. His grin was wider than ever, splitting his face like a wound. "You made it," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Not everyone does." "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He turned to face me, his grin fading. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you owe." I didn't understand. I didn't want to. But before I could say anything else, he reached out, his hand moving so fast, I didn't have time to react. His fingers touched my chest, right over the burning symbol, and everything went black. I woke up in my car, parked outside the diner. The sun was rising, casting an eerie orange glow over the empty parking lot. My phone was in my lap, the screen cracked, but still working. There was one new message. "It's over. For now." I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it's really over, or if he's still watching me, waiting for the next time I screw up. But I do know one thing. I'll never stop running. I found a dark web auction selling stolen government documents. One of the files contains the last known photo of my brother. I want to start this off by saying I know how dumb this is going to sound. You don't need to tell me. I've been kicking myself over it ever since. I don't even know why I'm posting this here. Maybe just to get it off my chest. Maybe to warn someone else before they make the same mistake. I don't know. But if you take anything away from this, just stay the hell off the deep web. So, a little backstory. My brother Kyle went missing about 5 years ago. He was 24 at the time, and it was one of those disappearances that just didn't make sense. No signs of struggle, no goodbye note, nothing suspicious in his personal life. One day, he left the house to go meet some friends, and he never came back. The police investigated, of course, but after the first few months, the leads dried up, and he just became another face on a missing poster. It destroyed my family. My mom especially. She's never been the same since. I spent years obsessing over every detail, reading every article, scouring forums for people who might have seen him. Eventually, I had to let it go, at least publicly, but privately, I never stopped looking. A few weeks ago, I came across this thread on a tech forum. It was about the dark web, And it wasn't the typical OMG hackers and hitmen stuff you see on YouTube. It was real users talking about what's actually out there. Most of it was boring. Drugs, counterfeit stuff, illegal downloads. But one post stood out. The guy claimed there were hidden auctions where you could buy, well, anything. Artifacts stolen from museums, classified government files, even missing person records. I know it sounds sketchy as hell, but something about it stuck with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if someone, somewhere, had information about my brother? What if that's why he disappeared? That night, after a few drinks, mistake number one, I decided to check it out. I'm not going to explain how to access the dark web here. It's not hard to figure out, but seriously, just don't. All I'll say is, I downloaded the right software, tweaked some settings, and within an hour, I was staring at a directory of links. Most of them had cryptic names like Black Lotus Market or Red Room Archives, but one stood out, Black Vault Auctions. The homepage was underwhelming, honestly. Just a plain black background with white text, no images, no flashy graphics. There was a countdown at the top with bold letters that read, Next Auction, 00/2357. Below that, a list of categories: historical artifacts, corporate documents, personal files, government, classifieds. Government classifieds caught my eye immediately. My stomach did this weird flip. I thought about Carl, about all the questions that had haunted me for years. Maybe this was it. Maybe I'd finally get some answers. The auction started, and at first, it was nothing like I expected. People weren't bidding on anything crazy, just boring stuff. Leaked emails, fake passports, old blueprints. But then the government files came up, and things got weird. The first listing was titled Operation Thornback, Decommissioned. The description said it was a CIA operation from the 1980s with details about unverified extraterrestrial phenomena. I laughed it off at first. It sounded like conspiracy theory junk, but the bid shot up fast. Someone paid almost $50,000 in Bitcoin for it. Then there was another file. This one was labeled Project Rook, Experimental Subjects, 2007 to 2016. That one got over $100,000 in less than a minute. I couldn't stop watching. The bids, the files, the sheer insanity of it. It was like watching a car crash. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. And then I saw it. Lot 43, Unsanctioned Operative Records, 2005 to 2019. The description said it contained information on blacklisted individuals deemed threats to national security. Below that, it listed digital images, personal correspondence, and last known locations. I froze when I saw the sample image. It was pixelated, but I could make out a person standing in front of what looked like an abandoned gas station. The description didn't say much else, but the starting bid was $10,000. I stared at that photo for what felt like forever. Something about the way the person was standing, the shape of their shoulders. It reminded me of Kyle. My heart was racing. I didn't even think. I just started typing. I placed a bid. You ever have one of those moments where you realize you've just made a huge mistake, but it's too late to back out? That's how I felt the second I hit confirm. I didn't even have the full amount in Bitcoin, but the auction didn't care. It let me place the bid anyway, and worse, I won. A notification popped up. Payment due in 24 hours. Below that was a set of instructions to transfer the Bitcoin. to an encrypted wallet address. If I didn't, the files would go to the second highest bidder. I was shaking. What the hell was I doing? Even if I could scrape together the money, how did I know this wasn't some scam? But then again, what if it wasn't? What if the files had answers? What if one of them really was Kyle? That's when my screen went black. For a second, I thought my computer had crashed. Then a message appeared in white text, right in the middle of the screen. Payment confirms silence. We're watching. I sat there frozen until the message disappeared and my desktop came back. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I unplugged my computer, locked it in the closet, and didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I woke up to a new email in my inbox. It was from an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line was clear. Congratulations on your purchase. The email contained a download link. No mention of payment, no threats, just a simple link. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. When I clicked that link, I wasn't thinking straight. My mind was a mess of adrenaline, fear, and this sick curiosity I couldn't shake. Deep down, I knew I should stop. I should delete the email, throw my computer in a dumpster, and pretend none of this ever happened. But I couldn't. What if the answer to everything, the reason my brother disappeared, was sitting behind that link? The file downloaded quickly. It was a zip folder titled Lot 43 OPR.DOCS, about 2 gigabytes. That was the first red flag. Classified documents shouldn't be neatly zipped up like a homework assignment. But what freaked me out more was the folder icon itself. It wasn't blank or generic. It was a black folder with a red symbol on it, a simple circle with a line cutting through it diagonally. I don't know why, but it made my stomach churn. It felt wrong, like I was opening something I was never supposed to see. When I unzipped the folder, there were 3 files inside. Subject, images, a folder containing what looked like hundreds of photos. Personal, correspondence.pdf, operation, summary.docs. I clicked on the images first. That's when things went from strange to outright horrifying. The photo folder was a chaotic mess. No organization, no labels, just hundreds of grainy, low-quality images. At first, they didn't make any sense. Most of them were random snapshots of people, taken from strange angles. There were photos of people walking down streets, sitting in coffee shops, sleeping in their beds. It was obvious these people had no idea they were being photographed. The worst part, most of the photos had been taken at night, through windows or cracked doors. Some were so close you could see the condensation from whoever was holding the camera. I felt sick. These weren't surveillance photos. They were trophies. I kept scrolling, faster and faster, my pulse thundering in my ears. Most of the people were strangers, but then, halfway through the folder, I stopped cold. It was him. It was Kyle. The photo was blurry, but I recognized him immediately. He was sitting in a dingy, fluorescent-lit room, hunched over a metal table, with his hands cuffed in front of him. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, like he hadn't slept in days. There was a scar on his forehead I didn't remember him having. Behind him, a tall figure stood, their face out of frame, but their hand rested on Kyle's shoulder. I just stared at the screen, barely breathing. 5 years. 5 years of not knowing if he was alive or dead. And here he was, trapped in a room I didn't recognize, with someone watching over him like a prisoner. I scrolled to the next photo, and then the next, my hand shaking so badly, I almost dropped my mouse. There were more pictures of him, each one worse than the last. In one, he was slumped over the table, his hair wet with sweat, In another, he was being dragged down a hallway by two figures in black tactical gear. And then there was the last photo. It was the same gas station from the auction preview, but this time the image wasn't pixelated. Kyle was standing in the middle of the frame, wearing the same clothes as the earlier photos. His arms were tied behind his back, and his face was turned toward the camera. His eyes weren't just tired anymore. They were terrified. Behind him, in the shadows, a figure loomed. I couldn't make out any details, except for the faint outline of their face. It looked wrong, distorted, like someone had stretched it into something almost human, but not quite. I slammed my laptop shut and stumbled away from the desk. I felt like I was going to throw up. I couldn't process what I'd just seen. Kyle was alive. At least, he had been when those photos were taken. But who had taken them? And why were they on a dark web auction? None of it made sense. I wanted answers, but I was too scared to look at the other files. Just opening that folder had felt like stepping into quicksand. The more I struggled to understand, the deeper I sank. But I couldn't stop. Not now. I forced myself to open the second file. Personal correspondence.pdf. It was a collection of emails and text messages, hundreds of them, all tied to different people. Most of them were mundane. Discussions about meeting times, requests for money, coded language that didn't make much sense. But then I started noticing patterns. Certain names came up over and over again. OPR handler, facility lead, and control. The messages were short and cold, like this one. From control to OPR handler. Subject number 17. Extraction complete. Subject in transit to facility 3. Begin processing immediately. Do not deviate from standard protocol. There were dozens like that. They all referred to subjects, and most included numbers. I didn't know what the numbers meant, but I found one that made my blood run cold. From facility lead to OPR handler. Subject number 43. Condition deteriorating. Recommend termination within 72 hours if no improvement. Attached, updated image log. Subject number 43. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. I just knew. That was Carl. The last file was the operation summary.xcx. It was long, pages and pages of text, filled with technical jargon and blacked out sections. But the parts I could read painted a terrifying picture. It described something called Project Harbinger, a covert program involving the identification and containment of unregistered individuals posing potential risks to national stability. The document didn't explain what those risks were, but it hinted at something far beyond normal government surveillance. Words like anomalous cognition and external variables kept popping up, and I had no idea what they meant. But the scariest part? The summary listed a timeline of operations, including dates, locations, and outcomes. Kyle's hometown, my hometown, was listed under April 2018. The outcome: subject successfully extracted. Status: pending evaluation. That's when I heard the knock on my door. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. 3 slow, heavy knocks that made my skin crawl. I glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. No one should have been at my door, not at this hour. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After a minute, the knocking stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching. I don't know what's happening. I don't know who to trust, but I'm starting to think I was never meant to find that auction, and now I think they know I did. I didn't sleep that night. After the knock, I stayed frozen in my chair, staring at the door like it was about to burst open. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside, felt like a threat. I told myself it was just my imagination, that no one was really there. But deep down, I knew. They knew I had the files. When the sun finally came up, I decided I needed to get out of the house. Staying there felt like sitting in a trap. I packed a bag, threw my laptop in, and headed to a motel a few towns over. I paid in cash and didn't give them my real name. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. Something was wrong, and I wasn't about to make it easy for whoever was watching me. But even in that dingy little room, with the blinds drawn and every lock secured, I didn't feel safe. The second I booted up my laptop, my stomach sank. There was a new file on my desktop. I didn't put it there. It was called look.closer.mp4. The title alone made my hands clammy. I didn't want to open it, but the alternative, ignoring it, pretending it wasn't there, felt worse. At least if I watched it, I'd know what I was dealing with. The video started with static, not that old school VHS kind, but digital static, like a corrupted file. After a few seconds, the screen cleared, and I realized it was security camera footage. The timestamp in the corner was from the night before, 2:17 a.m. My heart dropped. It was my front porch. I could see the outline of my door, the porch light casting a dim glow, and the shadow of someone standing just out of frame. Then the figure stepped forward. They were tall, dressed in all black, with a hood covering most of their face. Their posture was stiff, unnatural, like they were holding themselves back. Slowly, they raised a hand and knocked 3 times, just like I'd heard. But it wasn't the knocking that made my blood run cold. It was what happened after. The figure turned, just enough for the camera to catch the side of their face. Their features were blurry, distorted, like a bad rendering in a video game. But their eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, like 2 voids where light went to die. They stood there for a moment, perfectly still, then walked out of frame. The video cut to static again, then ended. I slammed the laptop shut and stumbled back, breathing hard. My first thought was to delete the file, but something stopped me. The fact that it was there at all meant they had access to my computer, probably even my location. Deleting it wouldn't solve anything. But how? I'd been so careful. I wasn't some newbie messing around on the dark web for kicks. I'd used encryption, VPNs, everything. And yet, they'd found me. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. For years, I'd been chasing Kyle's disappearance, like it was some kind of puzzle I could solve. But this wasn't a puzzle. This was something much bigger, something I didn't understand. And now I was tangled in it. I needed answers. I went back to the files, starting with the operation summary again. This time, I forced myself to read every line, no matter how much it made my head spin. The document kept referencing evaluation protocols and non-standard subjects, but the specifics were always redacted. Still, certain phrases jumped out. Environmental stress testing, psychological reconditioning, termination procedures, level 3. The more I read, the more it sounded like they weren't just watching these people. They were experimenting on them. But why? What made Kyle and the others subjects in the first place? Then I found something else. Buried near the end of the document was a single line that wasn't blacked out. Subject number 43 displayed signs of instability post-extraction. Relocation authorized under Protocol Blackwing. That wasn't mentioned anywhere else in the file, but it sounded important, like a code word for something they didn't want anyone to know about. I decided to search for Blackwing on the regular web, even though I knew it was probably useless. To my surprise, I actually found something. It was an old forum thread from years ago, archived on a site I'd never heard of. The thread was short, just a few posts from anonymous users, but what they said made my skin crawl. The original post was simple. What is Blackwing? The replies were vague, but one stood out. It's not a what, it's a where. Facility in the desert, off the grid. Experimental operations. Don't ask more. Facility in the desert. That's all it took for my mind to start spinning. Kyle had disappeared in April 2018, and the timeline in the document matched. Had they taken him to this place? Was he still there? I didn't want to think about it, but I couldn't stop myself. What kind of experiments were they running? Why was Kyle part of it? And what did instability mean? Had he tried to escape, fought back, or worse? As I sat there trying to piece it all together, I heard it again, the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. But this time, they weren't at my door. They were at the window. I froze. My motel room was on the 2nd floor. There shouldn't have been anyone at the window. Slowly, I turned my head, and for a split second, I thought I was imagining things. But no, someone was there. It was the figure from the video, standing perfectly still, their face inches from the glass. The hood obscured most of their features, but I could see their eyes, those black, empty eyes, staring straight at me. Then they tilted their head, like they were studying me. Slowly, they raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. It left a smudge, but it wasn't just a handprint. The glass seemed to ripple, like water, as if their touch wasn't entirely solid. I scrambled for my phone, but when I looked back, they were gone. No sound, no movement, just the faint smudge on the window. I don't know what's happening anymore. The files, the figures, the experiments. It's all connected, but I can't see the whole picture yet. All I know is I'm in way over my head, and I think Kyle was too. Whatever Blackwing is, it has answers, but getting them might cost me everything. For now, I'm leaving the motel. I don't know where I'll go, but I can't stay here. They found me once, and I'm not waiting around for them to do it again. I'll update as soon as I can, assuming I'm still here to do it. Leaving the motel wasn't easy. I was exhausted, mentally and physically, but I knew I couldn't stay. I packed up my things, stuffed my laptop into my bag, and slipped out just after sunset. The hallways were eerily quiet, but every shadow felt like it was moving. My skin prickled as I walked past the front desk and out into the cold night air. I didn't have a plan. My only thought was to keep moving, to stay unpredictable. I'd read enough about how people get tracked to know that staying in one place too long was suicide. But as I drove aimlessly through back roads and empty highways, it hit me. I wasn't just running from someone. I was running from something I didn't even understand. After about 2 hours, I pulled into a rest stop. It was one of those lonely, run-down places with a flickering light in the parking lot and a single vending machine that looked like it hadn't been restocked since the 90s. The air was still, unnervingly quiet. I sat in the car for a while, debating whether to go inside or just keep driving. That's when I noticed the car. It was parked a few spaces over, a black sedan with tinted windows. At first, I thought it was empty, But then I saw movement, just the faintest shift, like someone leaning forward in the driver's seat. My pulse spiked. I told myself it was just paranoia, but my gut was screaming at me to leave. Before I could, my phone buzzed. I shouldn't have looked. I knew better than to let my guard down, but the buzz felt like an alarm in the silence. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling, and saw the notification. Unknown number. Are you ready to look closer? I stared at the screen, my mind racing. It couldn't be a coincidence. Whoever sent the message knew I was here. They were watching me. Slowly, I raised my head and glanced back at the sedan. The driver's door was open. I didn't think. I just slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the parking lot. The sedan's headlights flared to life behind me, and within seconds, it was following me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might stop. I floored the gas pedal, the car lurching forward as I swerved onto the highway. For a few minutes, it was a full-blown chase. The sedan stayed on my tail, its high beams blinding me in the rearview mirror. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept driving, taking random turns and hoping to lose them. Eventually, I spotted a narrow dirt road cutting through the trees and turned onto it, praying they wouldn't follow. The headlights disappeared. I drove for another mile before pulling over. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. The dirt road was pitch black, surrounded by dense forest. I turned off the engine and sat in silence, listening for any sign of the sedan. Nothing. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. Then I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like burnt plastic or singed hair. I thought maybe it was the engine overheating, but when I leaned closer to the vents, the smell wasn't coming from the car. It was outside. That's when I saw it. In the rearview mirror, just beyond the red glow of my taillights, something moved. At first, it looked like a shadow, flickering in and out of the trees. But then it stepped closer, into the edge of the light, and I realized it wasn't a person. Its shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its limbs were elongated, almost skeletal, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was struggling to balance. The longer I stared, the less human it looked. Its face was featureless, but its skin was pale and stretched tight, like it had been burned, and its eyes, if you could call them that, were just empty black pits. It started walking toward the car. I panicked. I turned the key in the ignition, but the engine wouldn't start. My hands fumbled with the gear shift as I tried to think of a way out, but every second felt like an eternity. The thing kept coming, its movements slow and deliberate, like it knew I wasn't going anywhere. Then the knocking started. It wasn't at the window or the door. It was coming from the roof. 3 slow, heavy knocks. I don't know how I did it, but I finally got the engine to turn over. The moment the car roared to life, I slammed on the gas. The tires spun in the dirt before catching, and the car lurched forward, throwing me back into my seat. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was still following me. I drove until the dirt road gave way to asphalt, then until the forest opened up into farmland. The whole time, I kept expecting the sedan, or whatever that thing was, to appear in my mirrors. But nothing did. By the time I stopped again, the sky was starting to lighten. I pulled into another parking lot, this time behind an abandoned gas station, and sat there, shaking. I didn't know where I was. I didn't care. I just needed to breathe. That's when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You can't run forever. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. my chest tight with fear and frustration. I couldn't do this anymore. Running wasn't going to solve anything. If they wanted me to look closer, fine, I'd look, but not the way they wanted me to. I grabbed my laptop and opened it, half expecting another file to pop up, but the desktop was normal, as if nothing had happened. I connected to a public Wi-Fi signal from the gas station next door and started digging into Blackwing again. This time, I wasn't just reading. I was following every lead, no matter how small or insane it seemed. After hours of searching, I found a name, Dr. Alan Royce. He was mentioned in an old research paper about cognitive experiments and behavioral modification, but the paper had been retracted. A few more searches revealed he'd disappeared years ago, but before he vanished, he'd been listed as the head researcher at a facility in Nevada, a facility called Blackwing. My heart raced as I pieced it together. Royce's name had come up in conspiracy forums too, usually tied to shadow projects involving illegal human experiments. But there were no concrete details, just rumors. The only thing I could confirm was that Blackwing was real, and it was connected to the government. And I had to find it. I don't know what I'll do when I get there, or if I'll even make it, but I can't stop now. Whatever they're hiding, it has to be connected to Carl. Maybe he's still alive. Maybe he's waiting for someone to come find him. Or maybe I'm walking straight into a trap. Either way, I don't have a choice anymore. I'm going to Blackwing. If this is the last time I get to tell this story, at least someone will know what happened. Because if they catch me, I'm not coming back. The road to Nevada felt endless. By the time I crossed into the state, I was running on gas station coffee and sheer adrenaline. I couldn't stop thinking about Kyle, what he might have gone through, what he might still be going through. Every photo I'd seen, every line of text in those files, replayed in my mind like a broken record. I didn't care how dangerous this was. If there was even a chance of finding him, I had to take it. Finding Blackwing wasn't easy. It wasn't on any maps, of course, and every online mention of it was vague at best. But thanks to those conspiracy forums, I had a rough idea of where to look. A stretch of desert in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but sand and rocks. The closer I got, the stranger things became. My GPS went haywire first, blinking out entirely and then rerouting me in circles. My phone wouldn't hold a signal, even though the sky was clear, and I'd passed a cell tower not far back. And the road itself started to change. The asphalt cracked and crumbled into dirt, and then even the dirt seemed off. It was darker, almost black, and felt soft under the tires, like it wasn't natural. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another mirage. A cluster of low, blocky buildings shimmered in the distance, barely visible in the desert haze. But as I got closer, the details became sharper. Tall fences topped with razor wire, watchtowers with motionless figures standing guard, and a single gate with no visible road leading to it. It looked like something straight out of a dystopian nightmare, cold, sterile, and utterly lifeless. I parked the car behind a ridge, far enough away to avoid being spotted, but close enough to keep an eye on the gate. For hours I watched, waiting for some sign of movement, but nothing happened. The guards didn't patrol. No vehicles came or went. It was like the place was frozen in time. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to make my move. Getting to the fence was easier than I expected. The guards didn't seem to notice me at all, even though I was sure they'd see me crawling through the dirt. When I reached the fence, I found a gap near the base, just big enough to squeeze through. My heart was pounding as I slipped inside, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn back. The air inside the perimeter was wrong. It felt heavy, like the atmosphere itself was thicker. There was a faint hum in the background, so low I could barely hear it, but it rattled in my chest like a second heartbeat. The buildings loomed in front of me, their windows dark, their walls blank and featureless. I headed for the largest building, a squat concrete structure with no visible markings. The door was unlocked. The interior was colder than I expected. The walls were bare, the floors polished to a mirror-like shine. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh, sterile light on everything. There were no signs, no maps, nothing to indicate what the building was used for. Just endless hallways, each one identical to the last. As I moved deeper into the building, I started to notice things. Small things at first. A smear of something dark on the floor. A single boot lying forgotten in a corner. Then, bigger things. A room with overturned chairs and broken glass. A door hanging off its hinges, the metal warped like it had been melted. And then, the screams. They were faint, distant, but unmistakable. High-pitched, raw, filled with a kind of terror I'd never heard before. They echoed through the halls, growing louder as I followed them. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I couldn't. Not now. Not when I was this close. The screams led me to a heavy steel door at the end of a long hallway. It was marked with a single word, stenciled in faded black paint. Evaluation. My hands trembled as I pushed it open. The room on the other side was massive, almost cavernous, with rows of metal tables stretching into the distance. Most of them were empty, but a few were occupied. People strapped down, motionless, their faces hidden by large black visors. Machines surrounded them, their screens filled with lines of code and strange, pulsing graphs. The hum I'd heard earlier was louder here, almost deafening. I moved between the tables, my stomach turning with every step. People looked wrong. Their skin was pale and stretched tight over their bones, and their chests barely moved as they breathed. One of them twitched as I passed, their hand jerking against the restraints. I almost screamed. Then I saw him. Kyle was at the far end of the room, strapped to one of the tables. He looked thinner, almost skeletal, but it was him. His hair was longer, his face gaunt, but I would have known him anywhere. The visor covered his eyes, but his lips moved slightly, like he was whispering something. "Kyle!" I ran to him, ripping the restraints off his arms and legs. His body was limp, heavy, like he hadn't moved in days. I pulled the visor off, and his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he just stared at me, his gaze unfocused. "Alex?" His voice was barely a whisper. "It's me," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm here. I'm getting you out of here." But before I could move, he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You shouldn't have come," he said. His eyes, bloodshot and glossy, locked onto mine. "They'll find you. They'll..." A deafening alarm cut him off. The lights flickered, bathing the room in red as the hum turned into a high-pitched whine. I heard footsteps, heavy and fast, echoing down the hallway. Carl tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. I grabbed him under the arms and started dragging him toward the door, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. The footsteps grew louder. Shadows flickered at the edge of the hallway, moving in that same unnatural way I'd seen before. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We burst through the door and into the night, the alarm still blaring behind us. The guards, or whatever they were close now. I could hear them breathing, a wet, rasping sound that made my skin crawl. The car was just ahead, parked where I'd left it. Somehow, I managed to shove Kyle into the passenger seat and slam the door. The shadows were almost on top of us when I turned the key. The engine roared to life. We sped away from the facility, the tires kicking up black dust. I didn't stop, didn't look back, not until the facility was nothing more than a dot on the horizon. Kyle was slumped in the seat next to me, his breathing shallow but steady. I didn't know where we were going. I just knew we had to keep moving. As the sun rose, Kyle finally spoke. "They're not going to stop," he said, his voice barely audible. "You have no idea what you've done." I glanced at him, but he was already drifting back into unconsciousness. His face was pale, his skin cold to the touch. I don't know what they did to him, or what they even are, but I know one thing. This isn't over. Not for me, not for Kyle, and not for whoever comes next. I heard laughter coming from my neighbor's garage. Late at night, a dark web stream showed that same garage, but it was full of people. Alright, so let me preface this by saying that I'm not the type to jump to conclusions or make things out to be bigger than they are. I'm a normal guy, mid-20s, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood about an hour outside of Seattle. Life here is average. I work remotely in IT, binge way too much Netflix, and waste time scrolling through TikTok like everyone else. I've never been one for drama, and the last time something remotely exciting happened was when my other neighbor accidentally drove her car into her mailbox. So, when I say this story has messed me up, I mean seriously messed me up. It all started about 2 weeks ago. My neighbor, let's call him Steve, moved into the house next door about 6 months back. At first, he seemed like a chill guy, early 40s, a little quiet, but polite enough. He worked as a mechanic and kept to himself for the most part. Sometimes I'd hear him tinkering with cars in his garage late at night, but that's about it. Nothing weird, right? Everyone has hobbies. But then, one night, I started hearing something different. It was around 1 a.m., and I was up late gaming. I had my headphones on, but I swear, I heard faint laughter coming from outside. At first, I thought it was some teenagers screwing around, but when I muted my game, I realized it was coming from Steve's garage. It wasn't just normal laughter. It was loud, almost hysterical, and weirdly unsettling. Like, it didn't sound like one person. It sounded like a crowd. Now, I'm not nosy by nature, but the laughter went on for hours. It wasn't until 3 a.m. that it finally stopped. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he had friends over. But the next day, when I saw Steve taking out his trash, I casually asked him about it. "Late night party," I joked. He gave me this weird look, like I'd said something offensive. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just working on a project," he said, and then walked back into his house without another word. Okay, weird, but whatever. I let it go. A few nights later, the same thing happened, only this time, it wasn't just laughter. I could hear muffled voices, almost like a chant. It was low and rhythmic, but the laughter was still there too, cutting through the night like a knife. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it wasn't my problem, when I noticed something strange through my window. There was a faint glow coming from Steve's garage, not like the usual white light from fluorescent bulbs. This was red, flickering, almost like a fire. And the weirdest part? His garage door was cracked open, just enough for me to see shadows moving inside. At this point, my curiosity was eating me alive. I grabbed my phone and did what any self-respecting millennial would do. I opened Snapchat. I figured I'd record a quick video to show my friends, because honestly, it was starting to feel like the setup to some weird YouTube prank. But as soon as I opened the camera, the laughter stopped. Dead silence. The red light vanished. The garage door slowly creaked shut, and I swear I saw a pair of eyes staring at me through the gap before it closed completely. I'm not proud of how fast I closed my blinds and turned off my lights. The next day, I couldn't get it out of my head. I even Googled weird laughter late at night, like some kind of idiot. Of course, nothing useful came up, but one rabbit hole led to another, and somehow I ended up on Reddit, specifically a thread about the deep web. Now, I've always been vaguely aware of the deep web. You know, that shady part of the internet where people buy illegal stuff and do God knows what, but I'd never actually tried accessing it myself. The more I read though, the more I got curious. People on the thread talked about these live streams, Red Room shows where viewers could watch horrifying things happen in real time. Some said it was just urban legend, but others claimed they'd seen it themselves. I don't know what possessed me, but that night I downloaded Tor, the browser people use to access the deep web. I'm not going to explain how I did it because, honestly, I don't want anyone else following my stupidity. Let's just say it wasn't hard. Within an hour, I was on some sketchy forums, scrolling through links I had no business clicking on. That's when I saw it. A thread titled, "Garage Show, Live Tonight." The post was short, just a single line of text. The laughter begins at midnight. Below it was a link. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was probably some troll, right? But a small, nagging voice in the back of my head wouldn't let it go. Midnight was only 15 minutes away, and I couldn't shake the memory of Steve's garage, the laughter, the red light, the shadows. Against my better judgment, I clicked the link. The page that loaded was basic. A black background with a single video player in the center. The title at the top read, "The Garage Show, Livestream." There were no comments, no chat box, nothing. Just the video player, which displayed a countdown. 0, 0, 0, 1, 30. My heart was racing. I almost closed the browser, but something kept me there. I watched the countdown tick down. 30 seconds, 10 seconds, 5, 4, 3. When the stream started, my stomach dropped. The camera was positioned in what looked like a dimly lit garage. A garage that looked exactly like Steve's. The red glow was back, coming from a line of candles arranged in a circle on the floor. In the center of the circle was a chair, and sitting in the chair was a man. His hands and feet were tied, and his head was slumped forward like he was unconscious. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his shirt was ripped, and there were dark stains on the fabric. The laughter started again, low and guttural, echoing through my headphones. And then the camera panned. It moved slowly, almost like it was teasing me, until it focused on a group of people standing in the shadows. They were all wearing these creepy, identical masks, white, with exaggerated smiles painted on them. One of them stepped forward, holding a large wrench, and the laughter got louder. I slammed my laptop shut so hard I nearly broke it. I didn't sleep that night, I just sat there in the dark, heart pounding, staring at my window, like Steve was going to burst through at any moment. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops? What would I even tell them? Hey, my neighbor might be running some kind of murder cult in his garage. They'd think I was crazy. The next morning, I decided to pretend like nothing had happened. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't Steve's garage. Maybe it was just some sick internet prank. But when I went outside to get my mail, I saw him. Steve was standing in his driveway, wiping his hands on a rag. He smiled at me, and for the first time, I noticed just how sharp his teeth looked when he did. "You up late last night?" he asked casually. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone what I'd seen, not a single soul. But the way he said it, the way he was looking at me, I swear, he knew. I don't think I've ever felt real fear until that moment when Steve looked me in the eyes and asked if I'd been up late. It wasn't the question itself. It was his tone. Casual, like he already knew the answer, like he'd been watching me. I just stammered out something lame like, yeah, couldn't sleep, and walked back into my house as fast as I could without running. I locked the door behind me and went straight to my room, pulling the blinds closed. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but what could I even say? Hey, my neighbor's smile creeps me out, and I think I saw a live murder on the internet last night. Yeah, great plan. That'll go over well. But then I remembered something. Before I slammed my laptop shut, the stream had shown a timestamp in the corner of the screen. It had said 12:03 a.m. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it hit me. If the stream was live, it was happening at the exact same time. I heard the laughter, which meant that was Steve's garage. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe it was some elaborate prank. Maybe the garage just looked similar. Maybe the guy tied to the chair was an actor. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. And then there was the other thing, the masks, those white masks with the exaggerated smiles. They felt familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd seen them before. I spent hours digging through my memory until it finally clicked. About a month ago, I'd seen Steve unloading a box from his car. It was big, taped shut, and I remember jokingly asking him if he was smuggling something. He just gave me one of those tight-lipped smiles and said, "Just some supplies." But now I was almost certain those masks were in that box. That night, I stayed glued to my laptop, paranoid that another stream might pop up. I didn't want to click another link, but I also couldn't stop myself. It was like scratching at a scab. You know you shouldn't, but the itch is unbearable. Midnight came and went, and thankfully nothing happened. But just as I was starting to feel relief, I got a notification on my phone. It was from Instagram, a DM request from someone I didn't know. The username was a string of random numbers and letters. No profile picture, no posts, just one message. "Watch yourself." I stared at the screen, heart pounding, before finally typing back, "Who is this?" No response. I blocked the account and put my phone on silent, but the anxiety was eating me alive. I checked all the locks in my house, twice. I even dragged a chair in front of my bedroom door, just in case. But nothing happened that night, or the next. For a few days, it was almost like things were going back to normal. And then I heard the basement door. I should probably explain. I live alone. My house has a basement, but I never use it. It's mostly empty except for some old furniture left by the previous owner. The door to it is in the kitchen, and it's one of those heavy wooden ones that creaks loudly whenever you open it. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it creak. Not the wind, not the house settling. It was the distinct sound of the door opening. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I was sitting in the living room, headphones on, watching a video about urban legends. Ironic, I know. I muted the video and held my breath, listening. Another creak, and then the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the basement stairs. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, an empty wine bottle, and stood up, my hands trembling. The footsteps stopped just as I reached the kitchen. The door was open, swinging slightly on its hinges. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I took a step closer, my bare feet cold against the tile. That's when I noticed something on the floor. A smudge of dirt, like someone had tracked it in from outside. Only, it wasn't dirt. It was red. Blood. My instincts told me to run, to get out of the house, but something stronger, stupidity, maybe, kept me rooted in place. I pushed the door open the rest of the way, holding the bottle like it was a weapon. The basement was pitch black, but I could hear faint breathing, deep and raspy, coming from somewhere below. I was about to slam the door shut when I saw it. A white mask, sitting on the bottom step, staring up at me. My blood ran cold. I couldn't see who or what was wearing it, but the painted-on smile seemed to stretch wider the longer I looked. The breathing got louder, more ragged, like whoever was down there was getting closer, and then the doorbell rang. I practically jumped out of my skin. The sound was so loud, so sudden, that I nearly dropped the bottle. My first thought was that it had to be the police, but I hadn't called them. My second thought was Steve. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, then ran to the front door, peeking through the peephole. No one was there. The porch was empty, but when I opened the door, I found something waiting for me. A single sheet of paper, folded in half, with one word scrawled across the front. Tomorrow. The next day was a blur. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. My hands were shaking so badly that I spilled coffee all over the counter, and every sound made me jump. I even thought about going to the police, but what was I going to say? "Hey, I think my neighbor is running some kind of murder cult in his garage, and also someone broke into my house and left a mask in my basement." They'd laugh me out of the station. I spent most of the day barricaded in my room, refreshing Reddit threads about the deep web, trying to find anything that would explain what was happening. And then, just before midnight, I got another DM. This time, it was a link. No message, no context, just a link. I knew I shouldn't click it. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to ignore it, to delete it, to throw my phone into a river and never look back. But curiosity got the better of me. The link led to another live stream. Only this time, the title was different. It read, "The basement door wasn't locked." The camera feed was dark at first, just a faint outline of what looked like my living room. My living room. The angle was wrong though. It was too high up, like the camera was mounted on the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was looking at. The camera wasn't in my living room. It was in my basement, looking up through the vent. And then the laughter started again. The laughter wasn't just on the live stream anymore. It was in my house. I could hear it echoing faintly, rising up from the basement vent, like some sick joke. My chest felt like it was about to cave in. I slammed my laptop shut, but the sound didn't stop. It was real, and it was coming from below me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get the hell out of my house and never come back. But I couldn't move. My legs were frozen, my back pressed against the wall as I stared at the basement door across the room. It was still locked, still barricaded with a chair, but that didn't matter. They were already inside. They had to be. And then, my phone buzzed. It was a notification, one I've never gotten before. Incoming call, unknown number. My throat felt tight, like I couldn't swallow. My shaking hands hovered over the screen. I didn't want to answer it. Hell, I didn't even want to look at it. But the sound of the laughter was getting louder now, filling the room, seeping into my bones. I couldn't think straight. So, like the idiot I am, I answered. I didn't say anything at first, neither did they. The line was silent, except for the faint static that crackled through the speaker. I kept waiting for them to say something, but all I got was breathing. Slow, deliberate, heavy breathing. I mustered up every ounce of courage I had and whispered, "Who is this?" The laughter stopped, and then they said my name, my full name. Jason. It was a woman's voice, soft and sweet, like she was calling a child in for dinner. But it wasn't comforting. It was mocking. The way she said it, like she knew me better than I knew myself, made my skin crawl. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know why I bothered asking. I already knew the answer. They'd been watching me, listening. Maybe for weeks, maybe months. "I told you to watch yourself," she said, almost laughing. "But you didn't listen." I felt something cold slide down my spine. My hands were gripping the phone so tightly, my knuckles were turning white. "What do you want?" There was a long pause, and then she said, "Look outside." I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But my body moved on its own, like I was being pulled by some invisible force. I crept to the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The street was dark, empty, just like always. But when I looked at Steve's house, my blood turned to ice. The garage door was wide open. Inside, I could see the red glow again, flickering like firelight. Shadows moved across the walls, twisting and shifting, like something out of a nightmare. And then, just for a moment, I saw them. A group of people, maybe 6 or 7, all wearing those awful white masks with the grotesque smiles. They were standing in a circle, facing something I couldn't see. One of them was holding a large metal object, a wrench, maybe, or a crowbar. I couldn't tell, but the way they were standing, so still, so deliberate, it felt wrong, like they weren't human. And then one of them turned. They looked directly at me, tilting their head like they were curious. My heart stopped. I ducked down, pulling the blinds shut as fast as I could. My whole body was trembling now, adrenaline coursing through me like fire. I could barely think, barely breathe. I grabbed my phone again and checked the live stream. It was still going. The camera angle had changed. Now it was showing my window, the exact window I had just looked through. The feed was slightly delayed, but I could see myself standing there, frozen, staring out into the darkness, like a deer caught in headlights. And then the screen went black. I don't remember much after that. I think I panicked and threw my phone across the room. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight was streaming through the cracks in the blinds, and the laughter was gone. Everything felt normal, too normal. I thought maybe it was a dream, Maybe I'd finally lost my mind. But then I saw my phone, lying on the floor where I'd thrown it. The screen was cracked, but it was still on, and there was a notification. One new video message. My stomach churned. My fingers felt numb as I unlocked the phone and opened the message. It was a short video, maybe 10 seconds long. The screen was black at first, but then the camera panned up, showing a single image that made my blood run cold. It was my bedroom. The angle was high, like the camera was mounted in the corner of the ceiling. I could see myself lying in bed, sound asleep, completely unaware. The camera zoomed in slowly, focusing on my face, until the screen cut to black again. Underneath the video was a single line of text. See you tonight. I didn't leave the house that day. I couldn't. Every sound, every shadow made me jump. I kept all the lights on, triple-checked the locks, and stayed glued to the security app on my phone, watching the feed from my front door camera. But nothing happened. The day dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. And then the sun started to set. By 10 p.m., I was losing my mind. I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever was coming. I had to do something. So I grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife and made my way outside. I don't know what I was planning to do. Confront Steve, call him out, demand answers. It didn't matter. I just knew I couldn't stay cooped up in my house any longer. The street was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making every little noise feel amplified. Steve's garage was closed now, the house dark. But as I got closer, I noticed something on the driveway. A trail of footprints. Bloody footprints. They led from the garage to the side of the house, disappearing around the corner. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might pass out, but I forced myself to follow them. The trail led to the backyard, where the footprints stopped abruptly in front of a small, rusted metal door. It was half hidden behind a row of bushes, something I'd never noticed before. The door was slightly ajar, and from the darkness beyond, I could hear faint voices. And then, the laughter started again. I stood frozen in Steve's backyard, staring at the rusted metal door. The laughter, faint but distinct, echoed from the blackness beyond it, worming its way into my ears, like a sound I was never supposed to hear. It wasn't just laughter anymore. It was layered, distorted, like dozens of voices overlapping, some high-pitched, others guttural and deep, all laughing in perfect, horrifying sync. The knife in my hand felt useless, but it was all I had. My flashlight trembled as I pointed it toward the open door. Every fiber of my being told me to turn around, to run, to call the police, or drive until my gas tank hit empty. But I didn't move. I don't know if it was curiosity or fear, or some twisted combination of both, but my feet carried me forward, closer to the door. I pushed it open with the tip of the flashlight, the hinges groaning like they hadn't been used in years. A wave of cold air hit me, carrying the smell of damp earth and something metallic, something coppery and thick. Blood. My stomach churned, and for a second, I thought I might throw up. The laughter was louder now, coming from somewhere deep below. The door led to a narrow staircase that plunged into complete darkness. This was insane. Completely, absolutely insane. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I couldn't stop myself. It felt like I was being pulled, like gravity itself was dragging me down those stairs. So I went. The descent felt endless. The air grew colder, the walls tighter. My flashlight barely lit more than a few feet ahead, and the deeper I went, the more the smell intensified. It wasn't just blood, it was decay, rot, like something had died down here a long time ago and never been removed. The stairs finally ended at a concrete floor. The walls were rough and damp, like the inside of a cave. I scanned the flashlight around, trying to get my bearings, and that's when I saw them, the masks. Dozens of them, hanging on the walls, each one identical to the ones I'd seen in the live stream. White, with grotesque, exaggerated smiles. Some of them were smeared with what I could only assume was dried blood. The sight of them made my skin crawl, but it was what was beneath them that nearly made me drop the flashlight. Polaroid photos, hundreds of them, pinned to the walls in no particular order. They were faded, discolored, but I could still make out the faces. Men, women, children. All of them looked terrified, their eyes wide, mouths gagged, tears streaming down their faces. And in every photo, there was a figure standing behind them, wearing one of the masks. The same mask. Steve's mask. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth as bile rose in my throat. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I swore I saw movement in the corner of the room. I whipped the light around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows, just the dark. But then the laughter stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. My ears rang, my breath loud and ragged in the quiet. And then I heard it, a faint, wet sound, like something being dragged across the floor. It was coming from deeper inside. Against every ounce of common sense I had left, I followed the sound, my flashlight cutting through the dark. The corridor was long and narrow, the walls closing in the further I went. The smell was unbearable now, so thick I could taste it. My shoes squished against something wet and sticky, but I didn't dare look down. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, and then I saw it. A figure. It was hunched over something, its back to me. It wore one of the masks, but this one was different. The smile was bigger, wider, almost splitting the mask in half. Its hands were covered in blood, dripping onto the concrete floor as it dragged a large, black plastic bag behind it. The bag was heavy, its contents lumpy and misshapen, like it was holding someone. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. The figure stopped, tilting its head slightly, as if it could sense me standing there, and then, in one slow, deliberate motion, it turned to face me. The mask's hollow eyes stared into mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then it dropped the bag and started walking toward me, slowly at first, but then faster and faster. I bolted. I didn't care where I was going. I just ran. My flashlight bounced wildly, illuminating flashes of the corridor as I sprinted back the way I came. The sound of footsteps pounded behind me, faster, heavier, echoing off the walls. I could hear its laughter now, loud and maniacal, filling the space around me. I tripped, my knee slamming into the concrete, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I finally reached the staircase, I practically threw myself up the steps, my hands and knees scraping against the rough surface. The footsteps behind me were deafening now, the laughter almost unbearable. I burst through the metal door, slamming it shut behind me and throwing my entire weight against it. The laughter stopped. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, listening. Nothing, just silence. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it all. But then the door shook. Something slammed against it from the other side, hard enough to make my teeth rattle. I screamed, pressing harder against the door, but it slammed again and again. The metal groaned, the hinges straining. I knew it wouldn't hold. And then it stopped. I waited, heart pounding, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I stepped back, my hands trembling. The door didn't move. The silence was overwhelming, suffocating. I wanted to believe it was over, that whatever was behind that door was gone. But deep down, I knew better. I stumbled back to my house, locking every door, every window, triple-checking each one. My hands were covered in blood. Not mine, but I didn't know whose. My mind was racing, replaying everything I'd seen. The masks, the photos, the figure in the corridor, the bag. I sat in my living room, staring at the basement door. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, gripping the knife, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then, at exactly midnight, my phone buzzed. A single text message. No number, no contact. Just one word. Run. My blood turned to ice. The sound of laughter started again, this time from inside my house. It was coming from the basement. And then, slowly, the basement door creaked open. The basement door was wide open, and the laughter was rising again, this time, louder than ever. It wasn't just one person laughing. It was a chorus, a symphony of madness echoing from the darkness below. My hands tightened around the knife, but it felt like a toy, a useless, flimsy thing against whatever was down there. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to run so bad, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was stuck in some horrible nightmare, my body frozen while my mind screamed at me to move. And then, something happened that made my stomach drop. The laughter stopped. Completely. It was like the house had been vacuum sealed. All sound sucked away in an instant. I stood there, knife trembling in my hand, staring into the gaping blackness of the basement door. And then, from the shadows, I heard a single word. Jason. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was a voice, deep, guttural, and impossibly close. They weren't downstairs anymore. They were here. I snapped out of my trance and bolted for the front door, not caring about anything except getting out of that house. My heart was hammering, and every breath felt like fire in my chest. I flung the door open and stumbled onto the front lawn, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. My neighbor Steve's house was dark, no sign of life. The whole street was eerily quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. But then, as I sped down the empty street, my phone buzzed. I shouldn't have looked at it. I know that. But curiosity, or maybe fear, got the better of me. I glanced at the screen, and what I saw nearly made me crash the car. It was a live stream notification. The same site, the same title. The Garage Show, Live Now. I shouldn't have clicked it. I knew I shouldn't have clicked it. But my fingers moved on their own, opening the link as if some unseen force was guiding me. The video loaded, and my stomach twisted into knots. It was me. The live stream was showing me in real time, sitting in my car, driving down the dark, empty street. The angle was impossibly high, like the camera was mounted on a drone or something. I slammed on the brakes, my headlights illuminating nothing but endless asphalt and trees. My eyes darted around, searching for whatever was watching me, but there was nothing there. And then the camera panned. It shifted, showing something in the distance. At first, I couldn't make it out, but as the camera zoomed in, I felt my blood run cold. There was a figure standing in the middle of the road, far ahead of me. It was wearing one of those horrible white masks, the smile painted on its face, too wide, too sharp. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even react to the headlights. It just stood there, waiting. The laughter started again. I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching as I backed away. The figure didn't move, but I could see more of them now, stepping out of the shadows on either side of the road. 1, 2, 4, 7. They all wore the same masks, their bodies unnaturally still, their heads tilted slightly, as if studying me. The laughter grew louder, echoing from every direction surrounding me. I floored it. The car fishtailed as I spun it around and sped back the way I came. My heart was in my throat, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere was better than here. The live stream was still playing on my phone, but the angle had changed again. Now it was showing my house. The basement door was open, the camera slowly zooming in on the stairs. I couldn't stop watching, even as I drove. The screen was dark, but I could see movement, shadows shifting, something coming up the stairs, something big, something wrong, and then it stepped into the light. It was Steve, or at least it looked like Steve, but his face was wrong. His mouth was stretched into an inhuman grin, wider than any human face could manage. His eyes were hollow, empty, but somehow they were still watching me. He held something in his hands, a mask, one of those awful white masks, dripping with blood. I was so focused on the screen that I didn't see the figure standing in the middle of the road until it was too late. The impact was brutal. My car slammed into someone, and I screamed as the airbags deployed, hitting me like a brick wall. The car spun out of control, crashing into a ditch on the side of the road. Pain shot through my chest, my head spinning, but I managed to look up. The figure I'd hit was lying in the road, its mask cracked, its body twisted at an impossible angle. For a moment, I thought it was dead, but then it started to move. Its head snapped toward me, the broken mask shifting to reveal something underneath, something that wasn't human. Its mouth opened, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged yellow teeth, and then it laughed. Not like before. This was louder, deeper, filled with something primal and cruel. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I stumbled out of the car, my legs barely working, and started running. I didn't care where I was going. I just ran. The laughter followed me, echoing through the trees, growing louder and louder until it felt like it was inside my head. I don't know how I made it out. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed. A nurse told me I'd been found on the side of the road, covered in cuts and bruises, mumbling incoherently. They thought I'd been in a car accident, which I guess wasn't technically wrong. I didn't tell them about Steve, or the masks, or the live stream. What was the point? They'd think I was insane. Hell, I thought I was insane. But when I finally got home, I found something waiting for me. A package. It was sitting on my doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. My hand shook as I opened it, pulling away the layers of tape and cardboard. Inside was a single white mask, its smile stretched impossibly wide, and a note written in red ink. "You're part of the show now." The laughter started again. I moved out of that neighborhood the next day. I left everything behind, my house, my job, my life. But no matter where I go, I can't escape it. The laughter follows me. The masks appear in my dreams. And every night, at exactly midnight, my phone buzzes with the same notification. The Garage Show, live now. I never click the link anymore, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear them laughing just outside my window. And when I do, I know they're watching. They'll always be watching, because the show must go on.